Hello and welcome to Early Childhood Ireland's podcast, which features interviews and discussions on all issues relating to high quality in the early years and school age care sector. In our episodes, we have a range of speakers who are leaders in the areas that matter to Early Childhood Ireland members. This podcast series is proudly supported by Arachas Insurance, which offers a comprehensive range of cover at discounted premiums for both business and personal insurance products. So visit www.arachas.ie for more information. I'm Maura Corbett and I work with Early Childhood Ireland. So in today's episode, we're going to look at one of the really significant benefits of the group insurance scheme that's available to Early Childhood Ireland members through Arachas Insurance. To explain the benefits that are available through the group insurance scheme, I'm really pleased to be joined by Brendan Little and Paula Walshe from ARAG, who work with Arachas to provide a range of legal, HR and counselling supports. Brendan is a ACII qualified chartered insurer and a certified project manager with more than 30 years experience in the Irish insurance industry, spanning broking, general insurance and specialist insurance markets. Paula is the legal advisor and claims handler at ARAG LPL. Paula holds a certificate in legal studies, a diploma in professional legal studies, and she's also an accredited product advisor. She's a member of the Irish Institute of Legal Executives and the Insurance Institute of Ireland. So Brendan and Paula, you're both really welcome and thank you both for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Maura.
Thanks very much, Maura.
Okay, Brendan, I'll start with you. I just gave the kind of key points, bare bones of your bio. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about your experience in the insurance sector over the years?
Yeah, I suppose with over 30 years of experience in the insurance market, I've come across many new experiences and the development of the insurance over the number of years. I've been working with ARAG, previously called DAS, Legal Expenses Insurance, for 27 years. So I have a very strong knowledge of the legal expenses market. During that time, I have developed a number of relationships with a number of key partners, particularly with Arachas, all through their morphing into becoming Arachas. So we have developed a very strong relationship with Arachas and also with Early Childhood Ireland. We have many years of shared knowledge with Early Childhood Ireland. And what we're trying to achieve today is to have a better understanding of the products that we have available to your membership and the benefits of the product, because what we find with most insurance products is that they're hidden behind a legal document. And we want to bring what we offer to the members of Early Childhood Ireland to life and make sure that everybody understands it's a real document and it's a real policy and it's a real benefit to the members of Early Childhood Ireland. And what I mean by that is insurance is perceived as being something that arises when an incident happens or has to have happened. That is right in the most circumstances. However, with legal expenses, one of our core or the backbone of all our policies is our legal advice helpline. So we offer legal advice to all members, and that will be to all members of Early Childhood Ireland. But in addition to the legal advice helpline, we also have a counselling helpline service. So stress, bereavement, work-related issues, family-related issues, all that form of counselling is available to the membership of Early Childhood Ireland. So what we're saying here is we would like members to use the service. It does not penalise the premium that you pay at the end of the year, because we're encouraging people to use the service to give them peace of mind. And the backbone of the premise of legal expenses, particularly from an ARAG perspective, is that legal expenses should be perceived as a solicitor in your pocket. We're here to help in those difficult scenarios. And that's ultimately what I've learned over the number of years that I've worked with ARAG.
And I suppose just for clarity, it's members of Early Childhood Ireland who hold a group insurance scheme policy through Arachas, isn't that
That's very
correct?
true, yes.
Yeah.
That is correct.
Okay. So we're going to delve into, what that actually means in practice. But Paula, I might just go back to you and ask you, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit more? I kind
Yeah,
of just listed your many qualifications there, but do you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself?
sure. Yeah, well, I suppose my background is for 20 years before I joined ARAG, well, it's almost 5 years ago now, but previous to that, I had always worked in the legal industry. So I'd worked as a legal executive for in and around 20 years, where I would have dealt with a lot of employment law and litigation, all sorts really. So that's my background. And then I moved to the insurance industry and into ARAG, like I said, almost 5 years ago. And I am part of the legal and claims team in ARAG. And I'm one of the members who provides legal advice to your members. And we're, like Brendan said, we're available at any stage to provide legal advice for absolutely any queries that your policyholders may have.
Perfect. Perfect. So as I say, you're both really welcome. So Brendan, and maybe you've covered it already in, when you were introducing yourself, but can you tell us a little bit more about the relationship between Early Childhood Ireland and ARAG, who you mentioned that ARAG was formerly known as DAS. So do you want to tell us a little bit more, and maybe the cover that's available to our members who are covered under the group
Sure,
insurance scheme?
I can. It was back in the days of kid insurances, so I'm going back a good few years now at this stage. And it was Noel Sweetman and Graham Brown. And we've had a long-standing relationship with Kate Insurances. And obviously they've moved on to form part of the Arachas group that is today. And during the early days, what we wanted to do was create a product that was specific to members of Early Childhood Ireland. What were the areas of most concern to the members of Early Childhood Ireland? So we sat down with the broker and with members of Early Childhood Ireland many years ago, and we identified those key areas. And in particular, we saw that the likes of employment disputes was a key driver. Like, how do I deal with all the staff that I actually have? What happens if somebody needs to be let go? Or what do I do if I need to recruit somebody? What's the process I need to go? So we were here to try and establish and build a relationship with Early Childhood Ireland so that if anything happens, that we will be the first port of call in any scenarios. So one of the covers is employment disputes. So we also deal with the compensation awards as well. So if you follow the procedures that we set out in the guidelines, we will also look after the compensation awards in relation to employment disputes as well. In addition to this, we also look after tax, so revenue investigations. So if you're being called for a revenue investigation, which is known as if in receipt of the dreaded letter from revenue. So we will assist you. So we will engage with your tax consultant and assist them in actually preparing the books. So we're paying the costs of your tax consultant when you're being called for a revenue investigation, not your annual returns, but if you're called by revenue for a revenue investigation. Okay. And we'll assist in relation to that. The key driver in all the covers we have is pick up the phone and talk to us. Don't hide behind, I have a problem, and wait till it festers. Come talk to us straight away. The earlier engagement with ARAG, the better the outcome for the member of Early Childhood Ireland. The other areas that we have, and I mentioned already, is the legal advice helpline. We also have an online employment manual. So that ranges the profile from how do I recruit somebody? So you have to go follow a set pattern in relation. You can't just go out and say, I want a particular person for this particular job. You have to be open and transparent and be all inclusive to people who want to be recruited in the job. So we give you the guidelines of what you need to do. So these are all the scenarios that we built into a single product, and we built it around with Arachas and identified what needs to be put in place, and we offer that to Early Childhood Ireland. And for the past number of years, longer than I think it is in existence, it has developed really, really well. But what we're trying to do today in this podcast is bring the awareness back to the product, because it's very difficult to try and tell somebody about a product in written format. It's very easy to say to in the verbal format. And all we're saying here is, I'll keep it as simple as possible, because I'm in sales, so I have to keep things very simple for me to understand it, is treat ARAG like a solicitor in your pocket. We're here to help. And that is the crux of what we actually do. And that is why over the years we built up this product. You have a solicitor in your pocket.
Okay. And I agree with you completely. You know, sometimes you read these documents and it's, you know, what's the nub of what they're trying to say? So I suppose, Paula, what we said we do is, you know, to try to make some of these benefits and points clearer, that we'd outline some scenarios that are drawn from experiences that Early Childhood Ireland members may have encountered. And I suppose, just to be clear, and it'll become evident as we go through them, the names of the settings and educators are completely fictional, and the scenarios aren't based on any one setting. So the first one, Paula, and I'm going to turn to you because I know this is your area of expertise. Our members as employers have a legal obligation to provide their employees with written terms of employment. So can you outline the different types of contracts that are available and explain the key employment contract requirements that early years and school age care settings must meet under Irish legislation?
Sure. So look, there are different types of contracts. The main one, or the most prevalent one, I suppose, is a permanent contract, or what's known as a contract of indefinite duration. And this would be a contract that you would use for a permanent position, where the hope and the intention is that the employee would remain in employment on a long-term basis. That would be the norm. That would be the most common one used. Now, there are also other types of contracts, which would be fixed term contracts. And examples of those would be maybe a special purpose contract. So that would be perhaps for a person that you were taking on to deal with it for a specific purpose within the organization. So an example in the childcare setting would be, you'd be taking on somebody under the AIM funding for a specific purpose, to look after or to care for a specific child within the facility. And that contract would come to an end when the specific purpose ends. So, for example, the employee is taken on to look after a specific child within the organization until that child either finishes up within the service, the contract would come to an end, or if Hubble, for example, would pull the funding for that child, then the contract would come to an end at that point. So you can't put a specific date on it, but like I said, it's a specific purpose. And once the purpose comes to an end, the employment comes to an end.
That
and
purpose being to support the child to be, help reduce the ratios to support the child to be as involved in the setting as possible.
Exactly. And then other examples, fixed term contracts would be for the likes of maybe a sick leave cover, for where an employee has gone out on sick leave and they need to be replaced until they're fit to return to work. And then there's always the maternity leave covers, etc., etc. So they would be the fixed term ones. Now, just I suppose to bear in mind as well that the maximum number of fixed term contracts, so you can only provide 4 one-year fixed term contracts for employees legally. If you go beyond the 4, they can actually become what's known as, they're automatically transfer over to a contract of indefinite duration.
Okay.
The exception there being, of course, the specific purpose. And if that is the issue, if that's the reason why the contract ends, you would make sure that you would put them on notice and set out that that was the reason for the contract ending.
So going back to the case of the AIM one, so, sometimes in a setting, the same person may fulfill a number of consecutive AIM role. So,
Yes.
child A moves on to primary or mainstream or special school or whatever, but the same educator remains to be on an AIM contract for another child, but they're two separate contracts. Am I right in that?
Exactly. That would be correct. Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I suppose the next consideration is the core terms of a contract. So it's very important to bear in mind that when you take on a new employee, there are some obligations that you do need to comply with. And the first would be the day 5 statement. So basically that means within 5 days of taking on a new employee, you must provide them with some a statement, a 5-day statement, setting out the name and the address of the employee, the name and the address of the employer, also the type of contract and the duration, the pay and the hours. So those are the 5 things that must issue within 5 days. Then aside from that, within 1 month of them commencing employment, they must be provided with their main terms, so their contract of employment essentially, which again would set out things like name and address of the employer, name and address of the employee, the type of contract, the hours, the pay, the details of the job description, basically, and start date, the sick leave policy, holidays, pensions, remuneration, etc. So that's the long, detailed contract, which we're probably all familiar with.
Okay. And the provision of other policies and procedures of the setting would usually be issued around the same time.
They would. Yeah, they'd probably be referred to within the contract of employment, and you refer to what would normally be the company or the organization's handbook, which would set out in much more detail all of the policies and procedures of the organization.
Okay. So that's the contract issued. You've issued the contract, staff handbook, and so on. But so then staff management kind of kicks in and probationary periods. So in early years and school age care settings, effective staff management isn't only a regulatory and legal requirement, but it's vital. It's essential to ensuring high quality practice and positive outcomes for children. So, we know that with that in mind, it's important that registered providers and managers understand how probation, induction, performance management operates. So looking at a scenario, XYZ preschool recently hired Anne as an early years educator in their toddler room. Anne has 3 years experience in another setting. Fiona is the service manager and she covered the policies, room routine, health and safety procedures, and the curriculum framework as part of her induction. But within the first 4 weeks, the room leader in the toddler room reports that Anne is struggling to follow the daily routine, struggling to keep up with the record-keeping requirements of the room, and at times seems even overwhelmed at collection time and talking to parents. The following week, Fiona spoke with Anne, highlighting the ongoing concerns that were identified. Anne says she's still adjusting to the service and the children, and she feels she hasn't had enough guidance, but she's open to support and guidance. She's eager to learn from her team and she wants to improve. But despite this, Anne's underperformance continues over the next 3 weeks. The room leader raises concerns again and reports that she and her team are now picking up additional tasks to compensate. And I suppose this is at a time when you'd be starting to feel somebody is settling in and supporting colleagues. So, Paula, can you explain probationary periods and talk us through how Fiona, the service manager in this scenario, should appropriately manage, support and monitors Anne's performance during the probationary period, and at what point should any issues or concerns move into a more formal process?
Okay, well, I suppose firstly to say probationary periods in Ireland under the European Union Transparent and Predictable Working Conditions Regulations of 2022, they're capped at 6 months. Okay, so the probationary period is 6 months from the date of commencement of employment, and that can only be increased in very exceptional circumstances. So in this situation, you have this new employee, like you said, she started off, she has previous experience. It's said that she's been provided with, she's been given an induction, so she's shown what she needs to do. She's been provided with support. But like you said, she appears to be somewhat underperforming, even though these issues have been flagged with her. What I would be suggesting at this stage is arrange a meeting with her and basically start kind of what I'd call a performance improvement plan at this point. So sit down with her, explain her shortcomings, where she's falling down, and also ask her maybe why she feels she's falling down or what supports she needs to help her to improve. So you sit down together, you come up with a plan from both sides as to what steps both sides need to make to help this work out and help her to progress. And what I'd suggest is you'd set a follow-up, maybe a review meeting for another 4 weeks' time to see how she's going, how she's coming along. Is she improving? Like if she is looking for additional training, perhaps, well, you provide that to assist her and give her guidance along the way. And like I said, at the 4-week review, then see what progress has been made. If again there isn't sufficient progress, you try do the same again, point it out to her, document everything, make sure you have notes, provide her with a copy of the notes and a copy of the plan, and bring it forward again for another 4 weeks. And at this point then I suppose you're really around kind of 3 months really where she's in employment. And if it continues, you may have to look at whether or not she is the correct fit for the organization. Obviously, the hope would be that she improves and everything is fine and we move along. But if not, you may have to look at terminating under the probationary clause within the contract. Obviously, the hope would always be that you wouldn't have to do that, but sometimes that's the way it has to go, and you just follow the procedure and you make sure that you follow the procedure that is set out in the contract of employment and comply with the probationary clause there.
Okay. And like Brendan said, to contact ARAG during the process before you kind of
100%.
say cut and run.
Yeah.
I'm done.
So what I'd say is as soon as you feel, look, there may be an issue here or you're not satisfied, pick up the phone, call our legal advice line. One of our advisors will be available and they will guide you as to the steps. And absolutely, before you do decide to, if you're looking at termination, contact us. We'll talk you through everything. We'll go through all the documentation that you've already provided and see if we think, look, the only option here is, look, we may have to dismiss. Yeah.
Okay. And like you say, you hope it doesn't come to that, because that's not a scenario that anybody wants to be in.
That's it. Yeah.
So complaints then arise. Early years and school age care settings aren't any different to other workplaces, and sometimes issues arise that require people to be fair, structured, and provide a well-managed response in the workplace. Ensuring that employers understand their responsibilities and follow clear, consistent processes is, we know it's essential for maintaining trust, transparency, and compliance. So with any employment legislation, can you outline the key steps involved in managing a workplace complaint or grievance if a staff member feels aggrieved over something?
Yes, so the first thing I'd say to you is always refer to your company handbook or the organization's handbook and your grievance procedure that's set out within that. Sometimes a grievance, it may be that you can resolve it through discussion and mediation kind of on an informal basis. But if that's not the way it's going, and what you would need to do then is you would seek the grievance in writing from the complainant, the aggrieved employee. You would then put look, I suppose I'm assuming here that this grievance relates to another employee. within the organization. So at that point, then what you would do is you would put the other employee on notice that there is a grievance has been raised in respect of them, and you would have to provide them with a full copy of the grievance in order to provide natural justice and fair procedure for them also. Then you would set up a meeting with each party individually, and you would listen to what they have to say. You would prepare an investigation report, and based on the findings from both parties, and depending on the investigation outcome, then what you would do, well, first of all, you contact ourselves and you would provide us with the investigation report details before you would move on to issue any sanctions or findings, etc. But based on the the report findings, then if the matter were to move to disciplinary, you would again refer back to your handbook and follow your disciplinary procedures that's set out within the handbook. And just to bear in mind, it's extremely important as well that if this matter would be moving to disciplinary, that the person who would deal with the disciplinary would not have had any involvement in the investigation whatsoever, so as not to taint the process. But again, if you're moving to disciplinary, you would follow the procedure right to the person whom you feel is responsible, and you would set up a disciplinary meeting and decide on the sanction to be issued, whether it may be a warning or that it could be up to dismissal, depending on what the circumstances again. But that, of course, would be on the extreme side of things. You'd always be hopeful that there may be some sort of solution that you could try and resolve the grievance with. And there's also as well a consideration to make would be mediation in respect of the two employees, to see if it's a possibility that you can sit down with the two of them and see if it can be resolved somewhat mutually. But then again, that's not always the case either. And it depends. Every circumstance is different. So again, I'd refer back to contacting us as soon as the employee raises that grievance. Contact ourselves. We'll have a look. We'll guide you through what to do, and absolutely don't issue any sanction whatsoever without coming to ourselves for advice first.
Okay. I'm thinking of the kind of scenario where, some of our members there might be an owner manager and maybe two staff members. So, you were saying about, if it escalates, that the person talking to the staff member shouldn't have been involved in the process. Is there support that ARAG can provide in providing that kind of that person, or do you suggest that they ask somebody else that that they know and trust as an advisor to play that part?
Yeah, I suppose at this point, this is still an internal grievance. So our cover really would come on when there is an actual WRC claim in issue. So what we wouldn't provide anybody at this point. What we'd provide advice, of course, but it would be for the organization to appoint somebody else. It can be somebody within the organization. So perhaps a manager has dealt with the initial the grievance, and then you may have to get possibly a director within the company then, or if there's a second facility, some staff from the second facility to deal with the disciplinary. If some organizations, I suppose, are smaller and you don't have that luxury of having somebody to pass them on to, then you may have to look at outsourcing to a HR company to actually carry out the disciplinary process if needs be, because the key here is that natural justice and fair procedure has to be provided, and that process can't be tainted. And the issue is, even if the findings would be correct, and say, for example, somebody was dismissed as a result of a grievance, the organization could still they could still have a claim against them for unfair dismissal, even if the sanction was correct, but if the process was flawed, or if there was conflict of interest. So that's really the reason why it's very, very important to do that. But again, pick up the phone to ourselves at the beginning. We'll guide you through it and we'll help you in any way we can.
Okay. So the next scenario then that we were going to look at, and you'll see that sometimes there's kind of nearly a process in these, in settings, sometimes long-term staff absences can place significant pressure on teams in relation to continuity of care, maintaining adult-child ratios, and the overall quality of the service. So managing these situations sensitively and in line with employment obligations is essential to supporting the employee and the setting. And it can be a huge challenge for owner managers if somebody is out sick for a long time. You want to support them, you want to make sure that their well-being is okay, but equally you have parents who require the setting to operate, and you've regulation required to maintain the ratios and so on. So thinking of this scenario, LMNOP Creche employs 16 staff across its early years and school age care setting. Mary is the ECC room leader and she works full-time 40-hour week, and she has been with LMNOP Creche for 6 years, and she's been on certified sick leave for the past 12 weeks due to a medical condition. Her GP has indicated that her recovery may take additional time, but hasn't indicated a clear return to work date. So up until now, Jessica, who's the manager, has maintained occasional contact with Mary, mainly through emails to receive medical certs. No structured welfare check-in meetings have taken place. So Mary has now submitted a new medical cert via email extending her absence by another 4 weeks. So Jessica isn't sure how to balance supporting Mary, meeting the operational needs of the setting, and complying with employer legal obligations. Staff are beginning to express concern about continuity of care for the children, the increased workload, and burnout due to covering additional duties. So can you talk us through, Paula, how Jessica, the service manager, should manage and support Mary during this long-term absence?
Yeah, now this is a very common theme, I suppose, that comes up within the legal advice service that we provide. And it's a very, very difficult one, firstly, I suppose, because it's a classic example of where employment law doesn't necessarily marry in with the obligations that yourselves as childcare providers have with ratios and TUSLA, etc. So it is quite a difficult one to manage. But in this particular scenario here, this is a long-term employee that is out on sick leave. They've been with you for 6 years. They're on certified sick leave, so they're more than entitled to be out sick. Now, we don't know here what the illness is, and that's fine too. The employee doesn't have to provide that at this stage, but it leaves us in a difficult position here as to we've no idea when there may be or if there will be a return date. So what I'd suggest here is, first of all, that you would start off by making contact with the employee, with Mary, to see just a welfare check, really. Check in with her, pick up the phone, ask her how she's getting on. Is there anything that you can do to support her? If you do have an EAP, an employee assistance program, or anything like that, maybe provide her with the details if you deem it appropriate, and see what happens from there, what she says to you. If you may actually have to look at sending her to occupational health at this point as well, just for 2 reasons, I suppose. Firstly, to see if and when she may be fit to return to work, but on top of that as well, it might help to ascertain what her illness is and what supports you may have to put in place to help her to return to work. So what reasonable accommodations you would need to make for her. For example, just say if it happened to be a back injury, you might have to look, could you bring her back on a phased return maybe, and you might have to take away duties such as picking up toddlers and things like that until she's back to full health. But I do think you would have to look at occupational health at this stage, because you don't have any detail as to what the issue is or when she may be available to come back. Now, the other thing I noticed there, you said that staff are becoming a little bit aggrieved and that they're picking up they're picking up the slack maybe a little bit, and they're questioning when she'll return. It's important to note here that she's the employee, she's on sick leave, and really GDPR here, it's none of the other employees' business as to what's wrong with her or why she's out, etc. So be careful not to disclose any information about her to the other employees. But again, of course, you have to take their concerns seriously and try and make accommodations for them, because otherwise it could result in them raising a grievance as well, which kind of ties into the last scenario that we looked at. So yeah, it's really about it's for management, I suppose, to deal with the ratios, etc., and to try and sort that issue out. Now, I appreciate it's a very difficult scenario to be in, but again, like I said, this is the classic where employment and your obligations, employment law and the obligations of the organisation, they just don't tie in together. And there's no simple solution here, only manage the person who's out on sick leave as best you can and try and support them, and hope that you may be able to facilitate a return to work to get the status quo back in order again.
Yeah, it's certainly, from my experience as a manager, it certainly is one of the more challenging ones. And I'm glad you mentioned the point about confidentiality, and that, the reasons for her absence are hers, and, supporting her in as caring and professional way as you can, while managing the needs of the setting and the children and the parents. It's, without doubt, it's one of the more challenging ones. So Paula, thank you for taking us through, the way in which ARAG can provide support and information and advice on those scenarios that happen. And, I think it's clear that members who are covered under the group insurance scheme have access to this benefit, which is a great support and can actually save them making costly mistakes through, lack of information or knowledge. Brendan, do you want to add anything at this point, or, before you tell us how people can contact ARAG?
Well, the easiest way to get in contact with us is through our legal advice helpline.
Okay.
And the core issue here is there doesn't have to be a problem. It can be just a question. You need a legal query answered. So it doesn't have to be a huge scenario. It can be a simple question is, what do I do in relation to recruitment? Or I want to expand the premises in which I occupy. What do I do outside of them? So they're general legal queries, because that's the core premise of what we actually do. The other thing is what we do is the counselling helpline, and we find that this is an essential part, because it's deemed as being like an employee assistance benefit, so that every member of staff have access to our counselling helpline. So it's not just the principals within the organisation. So it's the staff members. So if they feel a little bit stressed, if they feel a little bit overwhelmed, not only just in relation to work-related issues, but also in relation to issues outside that they bring into their workplace, that we do have a counselling service available to them as well. But if we go back to the original coverage that we have in place, is the employment, the legal defence, the tax protection. But the backbone of all our policies is our legal advice and counselling helpline service. The other thing that all members have is access to our employment manual. So they have all the process and procedures. And the one thing that I always say, and compliance don't like when I say these kind of things, every insurance product is a legal document, and it can be a challenge to read them. And what we're encouraging our policyholders to do is, if you're confused, if you need clarification on a point, pick up the phone and talk to us. We're here to help. That is the core premise of ARAG. We're here to help.
Perfect. So I'll include the phone number, the contact details in the show notes. Paula, Brendan, thank you both so much. Really enjoyed that. Great to hear calm, logical, factual advice, which is, in the heat of any of these scenarios, they can get very frustrating, stressful, and, to have the calm, legal, supportive advice is wonderful. So I'd like to thank you both for taking the time to come on the podcast today. It was a great chat. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I really do appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
And thank you for listening to this episode of Early Childhood Ireland's podcast, which is proudly supported by Arachas Insurance. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and spread the word to your friends and colleagues, and stay tuned for our next episode.